Marcus Chen had been working as a janitor at Blackstone Corporation for 3 years. Every morning, he arrived before dawn to clean the gleaming marble floors of the 60-story building. His uniform was always pressed, his movements quiet and efficient. Nobody paid attention to the thin man with tired eyes who emptied their trash bins and mopped their conference rooms. The other employees barely acknowledged his existence. To them, he was just another invisible worker, someone who belonged in the background of their important lives. They discussed million-dollar deals while he cleaned around their feet, never imagining that the man scrubbing their floors once commanded armies and ruled kingdoms. Marcus had learned to blend into shadows to become forgettable. It was safer this way. 3 years ago, he had vanished from the supernatural world after a devastating betrayal that cost him everything. His dragon form, his massive fortune, his loyal followers, his very identity as Draconic Rex, the Dragon King who had ruled the Eastern Territories for over 2 centuries. The betrayal came from someone he trusted completely. His closest advisor, Victor Ashford, had orchestrated an elaborate scheme involving cursed artifacts and forbidden magic. The attack happened during the Grand Council meeting, when all the supernatural leaders gathered to discuss territorial disputes. Victor had poisoned the sacred wine with a rare substance called Dracosbane, a toxin specifically designed to weaken dragon royalty. As Marcus drank the ceremonial cup, agony ripped through his body. His dragon essence began to fade, his connection to his vast network of followers severed instantly. Victor stood before the shocked assembly and declared that Draconic Rex had become too weak to rule, that new leadership was needed for the changing times. In his weakened state, Marcus barely escaped with his life. He fled to the human world, adopting the identity of an ordinary man named Marcus Chen. For 3 years, he lived in a cramped studio apartment, working menial jobs to survive. The proud Dragon King who once owned palaces and commanded respect from every supernatural creature had become a janitor cleaning office buildings. But the Dracosbane poison was finally leaving his system. Marcus could feel his strength returning gradually, like a flame slowly rekindling after being nearly extinguished. His enhanced senses were sharpening again. His healing abilities were coming back. Most importantly, the mental barriers that had blocked his connection to his draconic powers were beginning to crumble. On this particular Tuesday morning, as Marcus pushed his cleaning cart through the executive floors, something felt different. His hearing had become so acute that he could distinguish individual heartbeats from 50 feet away. The familiar ache in his bones, a constant reminder of his weakened state, had completely disappeared overnight. As he entered the corner office belonging to CEO Patricia Wells, Marcus overheard a phone conversation that made him freeze in place. Patricia was speaking in hushed tones about supernatural investments, mentioning names he recognized from his former life. She talked about acquiring properties in the Eastern Territories, the same lands he once ruled. "The Dragon King has been gone for years now," Patricia said into her phone. "Victor Ashford assures me that Draconic Rex is dead. We can move forward with the development plans without any interference from the old supernatural families." Marcus's hands tightened on his mop handle. Victor was still using his disappearance to manipulate the supernatural world, making deals with human corporations to exploit sacred dragon lands. The man who betrayed him was not content with simply stealing his throne. He was destroying everything Marcus had spent centuries protecting. That evening, Marcus returned to his small apartment and stood before the cracked mirror in his bathroom. For the first time in 3 years, his eyes flickered with golden light. The dragon fire inside him was awakening, and with it came a burning desire for justice. He had spent 3 years in hiding, 3 years healing from betrayal, 3 years watching the world move on without him. But Marcus Chen, the janitor, was about to disappear forever. Draconic Rex was coming back, and this time he would be ready for his enemies. The Dragon King began making his plans. He would need allies, resources, and most importantly, he would need to move carefully. Victor had spent 3 years consolidating power, convincing everyone that the old king was dead. Marcus would use that assumption against him. Tomorrow he would start his comeback, but tonight he allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he had lost and what he was about to reclaim. The golden fire in his eyes burned brighter as ancient power coursed through his veins once more. Sarah Mitchell had worked as a security guard at Blackstone Corporation for 2 years, but her real job was far more complicated. She was a watcher, assigned by the Supernatural Council to monitor human corporate activities that might affect the hidden world. Her seemingly ordinary position gave her access to the building's security systems and the perfect cover to observe suspicious activities. Tonight, something was different about the janitor named Marcus Chen. Sarah had been tracking anomalous energy readings throughout the building for the past week, and they always seemed strongest wherever Marcus was working. Her specialized equipment, disguised as a standard security tablet, was picking up massive supernatural signatures emanating from the quiet man who cleaned the executive floors. As she watched the security cameras, Sarah noticed Marcus moving differently. His posture was straighter, his movements more confident. When he thought no one was looking, she caught glimpses of his eyes glowing with an unmistakable golden light that made her breath catch in her throat. Dragon fire. Sarah had been trained to recognize the signs of different supernatural creatures, but dragons were rare and powerful beings that most watchers never encountered. The energy readings coming from Marcus were unlike anything in her database. They were ancient, powerful, and growing stronger by the hour. She decided to investigate further. Using her security clearance, Sarah accessed the building after hours and began following the energy trail. It led her through empty corridors and up several floors, finally stopping at a maintenance room where Marcus stored his cleaning supplies. Hidden behind stacks of paper towels and cleaning products, Sarah discovered something that made her blood run cold. Scratched into the concrete wall were symbols she recognized from her training, ancient draconic runes that roughly translated to "The King Returns." But it was what she found next that truly shocked her. Tucked behind a loose brick was a small leather journal filled with detailed notes about Blackstone Corporation's supernatural dealings. Someone had been documenting every conversation, every phone call, every suspicious meeting for months. The handwriting was precise, methodical, and belonged to someone with extensive knowledge of supernatural politics. Sarah's mind raced as she connected the pieces. Marcus Chen wasn't just any dragon. He was someone important, someone who had been hiding in plain sight while gathering intelligence on human supernatural business connections. The energy readings made sense now. He was coming back into his full power after some kind of extended dormancy or injury. As she photographed the journal pages with her phone, Sarah heard footsteps in the corridor outside. She quickly replaced everything and hid behind the cleaning equipment just as the door opened. Marcus entered the room, and Sarah watched in amazement as his human facade began to slip. His movements became fluid and predatory, and when he examined the wall where his runes were carved, his eyes blazed with golden fire that illuminated the entire room. "I know you're there, Watcher," Marcus said quietly without turning around. "Your heartbeat gives you away." Sarah's training kicked in. She stepped out from her hiding place with her hands visible, trying to project calm confidence despite her racing pulse. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm assigned to monitor supernatural activities in this sector." Marcus turned to face her, and Sarah had to fight the urge to step back. The man she thought was a simple janitor now radiated power that made the air itself feel heavy. His golden eyes studied her with an intelligence that spoke of centuries of experience. "How long have you known?" Marcus asked. "I started getting readings a week ago," Sarah admitted. "But I only figured out what you really are tonight. You're Draconius Rex, aren't you? The Dragon King who disappeared 3 years ago." A slight smile crossed Marcus's features. "That name hasn't been spoken aloud in quite some time. Most believe Draconius Rex is dead." "Why are you here? Why are you working as a janitor when you should be ruling the Eastern Territories?" Marcus's expression darkened. "Because someone I trusted betrayed me and poisoned me with Dracosbane. I've spent 3 years healing and hiding while Victor Ashford convinced the supernatural world that I was dead. Now I discover he's making deals with human corporations to exploit my former lands." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She knew about Victor Ashford from council briefings. He had emerged as a powerful leader in the Eastern Territories, claiming to have stepped in after the Dragon King's mysterious disappearance. If Marcus was telling the truth, then Victor had orchestrated one of the most successful coups in supernatural history. "The council thinks Victor is a legitimate leader," Sarah said carefully. "He's been cooperating with human authorities, establishing new trade agreements, modernizing the old ways. He's selling out everything our kind has worked to protect for centuries," Marcus replied, his voice carrying an edge of controlled fury. Those trade agreements give human corporations access to sacred sites, magical resources that should never fall into mortal hands. Victor is destroying the balance that has kept both worlds safe. Sarah's mind was spinning. If Marcus was right, then she had stumbled onto something much bigger than simple corporate surveillance. This was about the fundamental power structure of the supernatural world. "What are you planning to do?" she asked. Marcus studied her for a long moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. "I'm going to reclaim what was stolen from me, but first, I need to gather proof of Victor's betrayal and build a network of allies who remember the old ways. The Council won't just take your word for it. Victor has spent 3 years building his reputation." "I know," Marcus said. "That's why I need someone on the inside, someone with access to Council communications and human government connections." Sarah realized what he was asking. "You want me to spy for you?" "I want you to help me save both worlds from Victor's short-sighted greed. The deals he's making with human corporations will expose our existence within a generation. The balance between our worlds will collapse, and both humans and supernatural beings will suffer." Looking into Marcus's golden eyes, Sarah saw the truth of his words. She had noticed concerning patterns in recent council directives, a push toward increased human cooperation that made many of the older supernatural families uncomfortable. If Marcus was right about Victor's true nature, then everything she thought she knew about recent supernatural politics was wrong. "If I help you," Sarah said slowly, "I'll be betraying my orders and risking my life." "If you don't help me," Marcus replied, "you'll be complicit in the destruction of everything the Watchers were created to protect." Sarah took a deep breath, knowing she was about to make a decision that would change everything. "What do you need me to do?" 3 weeks after Sarah's discovery, the plan was set in motion. Marcus had been carefully rebuilding his network of contacts while maintaining his cover as a janitor. Sarah used her position to access Council communications and gather intelligence on Victor's activities. What they discovered was far worse than either had imagined. Victor wasn't just making deals with human corporations. He was systematically selling supernatural artifacts and sacred locations to the highest bidders. Ancient dragon hoards were being emptied, and their contents shipped to private collectors around the world. Magical springs that had sustained supernatural communities for millennia were being diverted to power human industrial facilities. The plan they developed was risky, but necessary. Marcus would reveal himself at the upcoming Grand Assembly, the same type of gathering where Victor had originally betrayed him. This time, however, he would have evidence of Victor's crimes and allies positioned throughout the supernatural community. Sarah had identified several council members who were growing uncomfortable with Victor's policies. She had been carefully sharing information with them through secure channels, preparing them for Marcus's return. The key was timing. They needed to move before Victor realized his former king was still alive. On the night before the Grand Assembly, Marcus stood in his small apartment and began his transformation back to his true form. For 3 years, he had suppressed his draconic nature, but now golden scales began to shimmer beneath his human skin. His eyes blazed with ancient fire, and the air around him crackled with barely contained power. Sarah watched from across the room, still amazed by the magnitude of power Marcus possessed. She had helped him prepare for this moment, but seeing the Dragon King emerge from his human disguise was both beautiful and terrifying. "Are you ready for this?" Sarah asked as Marcus's transformation stabilized. "I've been ready for 3 years," Marcus replied, his voice now carrying the deep resonance of his true draconic form. "Victor believes he destroyed me, but he only made me stronger. His betrayal taught me to be more careful, more strategic. This time I won't be caught off guard." The Grand Assembly was being held at the Obsidian Citadel, a massive fortress built into a mountainside that served as neutral ground for supernatural negotiations. Representatives from every major supernatural family would be present, including several who had once sworn loyalty to Draconius Rex. As they traveled to the Citadel, Marcus explained the deeper implications of Victor's actions to Sarah. The supernatural world operated on ancient laws and traditions that maintained balance between different species and prevented exposure to the human world. Victor's modernization efforts were actually systematic violations of these laws, designed to consolidate power in his hands while generating enormous wealth. "He's convinced everyone that change is necessary for survival," Marcus said as they approached the citadel. "But the changes he's implementing will destroy us. The old ways exist for good reasons." Inside the citadel, the Grand Assembly was already in session. Victor Ashford stood at the center of the Great Hall, a tall man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. He wore expensive modern clothing instead of the traditional robes favored by supernatural leaders, a deliberate statement about his vision for the future. Sarah took her position in the observation gallery while Marcus prepared for his entrance. They had timed everything perfectly. Victor was in the middle of presenting his latest proposal for expanded human cooperation when the great doors of the assembly hall burst open. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Ancient power flooded the hall as Draconius Rex walked through the doors in his true form, golden scales gleaming in the torchlight, eyes blazing with dragon fire. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Several representatives actually stepped backward in shock. Victor's face went pale, then flushed with anger and fear. "Impossible," he whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're dead, I saw you die." "You saw what you wanted to see," Marcus replied, his voice carrying clearly throughout the hall. "You poisoned me with Dracosbane and left me to die, but Dragon Kings are not so easily killed." The assembly erupted in shocked murmurs. Many of the representatives had suspected something was wrong with Victor's story about the Dragon King's death, but none had dared to question it directly. Marcus walked to the center of the hall, his presence commanding attention from every supernatural being present. "Victor Ashford stands accused of treason against the supernatural community, attempted murder of a sitting monarch, and violation of the sacred accords that govern our relations with the human world." "These are lies," Victor declared, but his voice lacked conviction. "Desperate accusations from a pretender who seeks to undermine the progress we've made." Marcus smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Sarah Mitchell, please present the evidence." Sarah stood in the gallery and activated the projection system she had prepared. Images filled the air above the assembly hall, photographs of sacred sites being strip-mined by human corporations, shipping manifests showing supernatural artifacts being sold to private collectors, bank records proving Victor had received millions of dollars in payments from human companies. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Ancient beings who had lived for centuries looked at the proof of Victor's betrayal with growing anger. The Vampire Council members hissed in disapproval. The alpha werewolves growled low in their throats. Even the normally neutral fairy representatives showed signs of outrage. "You have sold our heritage for human money," declared Alina Nightshade, the eldest vampire on the council. "You have broken oaths that were sworn in blood before many of these humans were even born." Victor looked around the hall desperately, searching for supporters, but found only hostile faces. His carefully constructed facade was crumbling under the weight of Marcus's evidence. "The world is changing," Victor said, his voice rising. "We must adapt or be destroyed. The old ways are dying, and I'm trying to save us all." "By destroying everything we are." Marcus stepped closer to Victor, dragon fire beginning to gather around his hands. "By selling our most sacred possessions to humans who see them only as curiosities. By violating every principle our ancestors died to protect." The weight of centuries of tradition and law was on Marcus's side. The assembled supernatural leaders began to render their judgment, and it was clear that Victor's time as a leader was over. But Victor wasn't finished. As the assembly moved to formally restore Draconius Rex to his throne, Victor's hand moved to a concealed weapon at his belt. Sarah saw the movement from her position in the gallery and realized what was happening. "Marcus, look out," she shouted, but Victor was already drawing a crystalline blade infused with Dracosbane poison. The hall erupted into chaos as Victor lunged forward with the poisoned weapon, determined to finish what he had started 3 years ago. But this time, Marcus was ready for betrayal, and his response would remind everyone present why dragons were among the most feared predators in both worlds. The poisoned blade sliced through the air toward Marcus's heart, but the Dragon King was no longer the trusting ruler he had been 3 years ago. His reflexes, honed by months of careful physical training and enhanced by his returning draconic powers, kicked in with lethal precision. Marcus caught Victor's wrist in an iron grip, stopping the blade inches from his chest. The Dracosbane poison coating the weapon hissed and steamed as it came into contact with Marcus's restored magical aura, but this time his system was ready for it. 3 years of gradual healing had built up his immunity to the toxin. "You made one critical mistake, Victor," Marcus said, his golden eyes blazing as he tightened his grip. "You assumed I would remain weak forever." With a swift movement, Marcus twisted Victor's arm, forcing him to drop the poisoned blade. The crystal weapon shattered on the stone floor, its toxic contents neutralized by the ancient protective wards built into the citadel. The assembled supernatural leaders watched in stunned silence as their former Dragon King demonstrated the full extent of his recovered power. Victor struggled against Marcus's grip, but it was like trying to break free from a mountain. The strength difference was overwhelming. "Draconius Rex," called out Elder Thornwick, the ancient oak spirit who served as the assembly's lawkeeper. "What justice do you seek for these crimes?" Marcus looked around the great hall, meeting the eyes of beings he had once ruled and protected. "I seek the justice our laws demand. Victor Ashford has committed treason, attempted murder, and violated the sacred accords. By our oldest laws, the penalty is death." A collective intake of breath echoed through the hall. Even for supernatural beings, the death penalty was rarely invoked. But the evidence was clear, and the crimes were among the most serious possible under their ancient legal system. Victor's face had gone completely white. "Please," he whispered, "I was trying to help our people survive in a changing world. Everything I did was for the greater good." "You were helping yourself to enormous wealth while destroying everything our ancestors built," Marcus replied coldly. "You sold sacred dragon eggs to human collectors. You allowed mining companies to destroy fairy circles that took centuries to grow. You betrayed trust that was given to you freely." Sarah watched from the gallery as Marcus made his decision. She could see the internal struggle on his face. Despite Victor's betrayal, despite everything he had lost, Marcus was still the just ruler he had always been. "However," Marcus continued, and the hall fell completely silent, "I am not the same king I was 3 years ago. I have learned mercy in my exile, and I have learned the value of redemption." He released Victor's wrist, and the defeated traitor collapsed to his knees. "Victor Ashford, you are stripped of all titles, all property, and all standing in the supernatural community. You will spend the remainder of your days in the crystal caverns, sealed away from both worlds, where you can contemplate the destruction you have caused." The crystal caverns were a prison dimension where time moved differently. A lifetime of imprisonment there would feel like centuries of isolation, but it wasn't death. It was perhaps a crueler punishment, but it allowed for the possibility of eventual redemption. "The Assembly concurs," Elder Thornwick declared. "Victor Ashford is hereby banished to the crystal caverns. Guards, remove him." Two massive stone golems, ancient guardians of the citadel, stepped forward and gently but firmly escorted Victor from the hall. As he was led away, the broken man looked back once at Marcus with an expression of bitter regret. With Victor gone, the real work began. The Assembly formally restored Draconius Rex to his throne, acknowledging him as the rightful ruler of the Eastern Territories. But Marcus knew that reclaiming his title was only the beginning. "My fellow leaders," Marcus addressed the Assembly, "we face a crisis that goes beyond Victor's betrayal. The balance between our world and the human world is shifting. Technology advances every day, making it harder for us to remain hidden. We need new approaches that honor our traditions while adapting to reality." Over the next several hours, Marcus outlined his vision for the future. Unlike Victor's radical modernization, Marcus proposed careful, measured changes that would strengthen supernatural communities while maintaining their essential character. He suggested establishing legitimate businesses that could generate wealth without selling sacred artifacts. He proposed educational programs that would help young supernatural beings understand both worlds. Most importantly, he called for the creation of a new council position dedicated to monitoring human supernatural interactions and preventing future betrayals. "I nominate Sarah Mitchell for this position," Marcus announced, surprising many in the Assembly. "She has proven herself capable of operating in both worlds while maintaining her loyalty to our laws and traditions." Sarah felt every eye in the hall turn to her. She had not expected this honor, and the responsibility was enormous. But looking down at Marcus, she saw his confidence in her abilities and nodded her acceptance. The Assembly voted unanimously to create the new position and confirm Sarah's appointment. She would be the first Watcher to hold such a high-ranking office, but her unique insights into both human corporate culture and supernatural politics made her the perfect choice. As the official ceremonies concluded, Marcus found himself alone with Sarah in a side chamber of the Citadel. For the first time since his return, he allowed his formal composure to relax slightly. "Thank you," he said simply. "Without your help, I never could have gathered the evidence needed to expose Victor." "You saved both our worlds," Sarah replied. "Victor's path would have led to disaster for everyone." Marcus nodded, but his expression was thoughtful. "The real work is just beginning. Reclaiming my throne was the easy part. Now I have to rebuild trust, repair the damage Victor caused, and prepare our community for the challenges ahead." "You won't be doing it alone," Sarah assured him. "You have allies now, people who understand what you're fighting for." As they talked, reports began arriving from the Eastern territories. Word of the Dragon King's return was spreading quickly, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. Communities that had suffered under Victor's policies were celebrating. Sacred sites that had been sold to human corporations were being reclaimed. The healing process had begun. But Marcus knew that other challenges lay ahead. There were human corporations that had invested heavily in Victor's schemes and wouldn't give up their supernatural assets easily. There were other supernatural leaders who might try to take advantage of the transition period. Most importantly, there were still secrets hidden in the shadows, secrets that might threaten everything Marcus was working to rebuild. As the Dragon King prepared to return to his ancestral home and begin the work of restoration, he reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to this moment. 3 years ago, he had been a proud but perhaps naive ruler. His exile had taught him humility, caution, and the true value of loyalty. The servant who had helped him reclaim his throne would become one of his most trusted advisors. And together, they would work to ensure that the supernatural world could thrive in the modern era without losing its soul. 6 months after reclaiming his throne, Marcus stood on the balcony of his restored palace, overlooking the eastern territories that were finally healing from Victor's damage. The mining operations had been shut down, the sacred sites were being cleansed and protected, and the supernatural communities were thriving once again under his leadership. But the journey back to power had revealed secrets that changed everything Marcus thought he knew about his own story. Sarah approached from behind, carrying a thick folder of documents. In her new role as Director of Interworld Relations, she had become indispensable to Marcus's administration. More than that, she had become the closest friend he had ever known. "The investigation into Victor's network is complete," Sarah announced, setting the folder on the stone table between them. "What we found is going to shock you." Marcus turned from his contemplation of the valley below. More human corporations involved in the artifact trafficking. "Worse," Sarah said, her expression grave. "Victor wasn't the mastermind behind the original betrayal. He was working for someone else, someone who has been manipulating supernatural politics for decades." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had spent 6 months believing that justice had been served, that the threat to his people had been neutralized. Now Sarah was telling him that Victor's betrayal was just one piece of a much larger conspiracy. "Show me," Marcus said, settling into his chair with the wary tension of a predator sensing danger. Sarah opened the folder and spread out photographs, documents, and transcripts across the table. "We found these hidden in Victor's private vault. Look at the dates on these communications." Marcus studied the papers, his golden eyes widening as he realized what he was seeing. The oldest documents were dated 15 years before Victor's betrayal, long before Victor had even gained a position of trust in Marcus's court. "Someone has been planning this for decades," Marcus said slowly. "Victor was recruited, trained, and positioned specifically to betray me." "That's not the worst part," Sarah continued. "Look at this signature." She pointed to the bottom of several documents, where an elegant signature was clearly visible. Marcus read the name and felt his world shift beneath him. "Elena Nightshade," he whispered. Elena was the eldest vampire on the council, a being he had trusted for over a century. She had been one of his strongest supporters during Victor's trial, one of the most vocal advocates for his restoration. The idea that she had orchestrated his downfall was almost impossible to comprehend. "Why?" Marcus asked. "Elena and I have been allies for generations. What could she possibly gain from destroying me?" Sarah pulled out another set of documents, these ones detailing financial transactions and property acquisitions. She's been systematically buying up supernatural territories and businesses while you were in exile. With Victor as her puppet ruler, she was able to acquire assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But she supported my return. She voted to banish Victor. Because she knew you would discover the truth eventually, Sarah explained. This way, she appears to be your loyal ally while Victor takes all the blame. She sacrificed one pawn to protect her larger game. Marcus stood and began packing, his mind racing through the implications. If Alina had been manipulating events for decades, how many other crises in the supernatural world could be traced back to her influence? There's more, Sarah said quietly. We found evidence that she's been selling information to human governments. Military secrets, magical vulnerabilities, the locations of hidden supernatural communities. The scope of Alina's betrayal was staggering. She hadn't just targeted Marcus. She had been systematically undermining the entire supernatural world for her own profit. How long have you known? Marcus asked. I started finding inconsistencies 3 weeks ago. I wanted to be absolutely certain before I brought this to you. Marcus appreciated Sarah's thoroughness, but he also realized the immediate danger they faced. Alina was still in a position of power, still trusted by the council, still able to cause enormous damage. We need to move carefully, Marcus said. Alina is far more dangerous than Victor ever was. She's had decades to prepare for discovery, and she has resources we don't even know about. I've already started building a case, Sarah assured him. But we need more evidence before we can make accusations. Alina's reputation is spotless. The council will need overwhelming proof to believe she's capable of such betrayal. Over the following weeks, Marcus and Sarah worked in secret to uncover the full extent of Alina's conspiracy. What they discovered was a web of corruption that touched every aspect of supernatural society. Alina had been playing different factions against each other for decades, profiting from the chaos while appearing to be a voice of reason and stability. She had engineered territorial disputes that weakened rival vampire clans. She had manipulated werewolf pack politics to eliminate leaders who opposed her agenda. She had even been responsible for several supposed accidental deaths of supernatural beings who had gotten too close to discovering her true nature. The evidence gathering was dangerous work. Alina's network included spies and informants throughout the supernatural community. Several times, Marcus and Sarah barely avoided discovery as they investigated Alina's operations. During one particularly risky mission to Alina's private estate, they discovered her most shocking secret. Hidden beneath her mansion was a laboratory where she had been experimenting with supernatural genetics, trying to create hybrid beings that would be loyal only to her. She's not just trying to control the supernatural world, Sarah whispered as they photographed the laboratory equipment. She's trying to replace it with something she can completely dominate. The hybrid experiments explained much about Alina's long-term strategy. She wasn't content with wealth and political power. She wanted to become the supreme ruler of a new supernatural order with an army of genetically loyal servants. But Marcus also realized something else as he studied Alina's research notes. The Dracosbane poison that Victor had used against him hadn't been a traditional recipe. It had been specifically engineered to target his particular draconic bloodline, meaning Alina had been studying him for years, learning his weaknesses, preparing for the perfect moment to strike. When they finally had enough evidence to present to the council, Marcus felt a familiar mix of anger and betrayal. But this time, he also felt something else, a cold, calculating fury that came from understanding the true scope of what he was fighting. Alina Nightshade had spent decades destroying lives and corrupting everything the supernatural world stood for. She had betrayed not just Marcus, but every being who had ever trusted her. The justice she would face would be far more severe than what Victor had received. As Marcus prepared for the confrontation that would determine the future of the supernatural world, he reflected on how much he had changed since his exile. The naive king who had trusted too easily was gone, replaced by a leader who understood that some enemies hide behind friendly faces for decades before striking. Sarah stood beside him as they prepared to enter the council chambers where Alina waited, unaware that her centuries of deception were about to be exposed. The servant who had become a trusted ally was now his partner in the most important battle of his reign. "Are you ready to finish this?" Sarah asked. Marcus's eyes blazed with dragon fire as he nodded. It's time for the real mastermind to face justice. The final confrontation would test everything Marcus had learned about power, trust, and the price of ruling wisely in a world where the greatest threats often come from within.